My name is Lade Tawak, and I am a UX researcher. And I'll be talking about understanding your users and why it's important as a developer and how you can do that. I feel like okay. So a bit about me. I'm a design researcher, and I've been doing this for about 2 years this month. I was at, and then we can do Q&A if you have questions after. So user-centered design. I'm sure that many of us are already familiar with the term, so I'm not going to explain what it is in depth. Basically, it's just saying that in your product development process, that you should think about the people who will be using your product. And then it applies to everything that you do. So it is always, whenever you're doing anything, think about who will be using this thing after when you're done. So it involves developing empathy for your users. If you already work with designers, you've probably heard people throw around that word empathy, which is essentially thinking about who is using your products, understanding them, what they do, what they think, their needs, where their constraints are. It allows you to create useful and easy to use products. And a question that comes up a lot with developers is, how can I be user-centered since I usually don't have direct contact with the user, because usually it's the designer or customer support or somebody else who actually relates directly with the user. So how can developers be user-centered? So why should you care, since basically somebody does the design and gives it to you to code and then you make it work? So if you're a user-centered developer, it means that you have less, there was research done and they found out that 50% of programmers' time, they spend it doing avoidable reworks because they didn't do enough research and they discovered that, they have to change something, and you've already gone halfway into development, and then somebody comes and says, you have to change this thing because this happened or because that happened. How many people have experienced this before? Where you had to rework your code because they changed something midway. And this is usually a result of not involving the users from the beginning. If your organization or you don't follow the user-centered process, there will be different things going wrong, and then you have to go and rewrite something that you have done before. Also, if you're user-centered, it will allow you to understand design decisions. So if they say, put this button on the left instead of on the right, you will understand why that's happening, and it reduces back and forth. When the designer says this and then you say, no, we'll do this instead, or you say, you don't want to do it that way. But if you're involved in the process, then that back and forth is erased. You can do your work quicker, you can do your work more easily, there's more focus, there's more direction, and you don't have to worry about, I have to change this thing in 2 weeks because somebody will come and say something different tomorrow. Also, as a developer, you are also your user. There's a phrase that comes up a lot in product design, which is, you are not your user. But as a developer that writes code, you use your code. You always go back to your code, right? And then if you don't think about, or somebody else on your team might need to maintain that code base, and then if you don't think about, how can I do this so that when I come back in a month, in 3 months, when I need to change something, I understand what this is, or the person who is coming after me can see it and make sense of it. Also, and if you do that, it makes your work and the work of other people easier. It also allows you to think of the constraints of the people, and I'll talk about constraints a bit later. So it allows you to think about the constraints of the people that you're building for. So what can you do to become more user-centered? On the user side, it means being more involved in design and research. So we're not saying that you should leave your coding and come and start doing research with the designer. It just simply means if they're doing interviews, stay for 10 minutes or so and listen to the user directly. If they're doing research synthesis or analysis, sit in the room and help. Stay for 5 minutes, stay for 10 minutes. When customer support is doing calls, sit in on the calls, speak with customer support guys, let them tell you what the users are saying so that you can understand from the user point of view what the problem is. And that essentially is what user-centered design is. Also, you should think about constraints, like I said earlier. So you think about who are the people. If you understand who is using your product, you will know, okay, what is their technological knowledge. So if you're building something that, let's say, 70-year-olds will use, you will know that you need to make it as simple as possible, different to if you're building something that another developer will use or somebody who is tech-savvy will use. Speak with guys in data analytics, speak to salespeople, people that have more direct contact with your users. If you cannot be directly involved with it, if you can spare 10 minutes and sit on a call or sit in an interview or go with the designer to do, or the researcher to do research, also test your software, test your code, so that if you go back to it later, it's easier for you to see where you need to change things, write clean code basically. So if you're just doing things haphazardly, you're not thinking about who is going to check it later or who is going to maintain this thing, and sometimes it might be you, and then you come back and you might even be confused. So being user-centered saves you and the business time and money and helps you build the best products for your users and yourself, because it's your code. You're going to keep working with it. And if you didn't think about that before you started, if you just wrote it anyhow that somebody who's looking at it will not understand, you probably might not also, it might take you a while to figure it out again after. And so that's the end of my talk. So, questions? Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay, just come in the mic.
So on trying to reduce them back and forth, there are some instances when the user doesn't actually know what he wants.
Okay.
So it is what you give that user will now form opinion with. So how do you reduce back and forth in this kind of situation?
So back and forth with the user or with
the user.
Okay.
I mean with the user.
With the end user.
Yeah, it's the end user that will actually determine how your product will look. Because once they approve it or they disapprove it, it's going to affect your product one way or another, as regards your timelines.
Okay, so this comes up a lot about people not knowing what they want. But it's not that people don't know what they want. People might not know what they want, but they know what they don't want, which is why you need to do research, which is why there's supposed to be somebody in your team whose job is to research and have conversations with the users, potential users, and see what they actually want. Because people do know what they want. They may not know how they want it, but they know what they want. So if I say that what I want to pay people, but I want it to be really easy, I know what I want. It's up to the designer, the developer, the researcher, the product manager, the business owner, everybody, to decide how to give me the thing that I say I want. So it's really a thing of, to avoid that back and forth, is to do your research in the beginning, which is why even if your organization does not cater to that, it's good for you to take that time by yourself and say, okay, let me speak to one or two people You don't have to become a researcher by yourself or become a designer by yourself. But what you should do is speak to one person that fits into your target group to see, oh, okay, this is what you want. And then think about, which is why there's a whole process where you don't just go from research to development. You research, you prototype, you sketch, you test, then you develop. So that avoids the whole, you start writing code and then you have to change it because they researched some more and they found out something different, or they pushed it out already and then nobody's using it because X, Y, Z, and you have to start over again. Okay, there's a question here.
All right, thank you very much. You already answered my first question, so let me just go to the second question. So it has to do with someone who perhaps works with a firm that...
Sorry?
I said someone who perhaps works with a firm that is not large, so to say. I mean, you don't have...
Works with what?
A firm. A company.
I can't hear you.
I said someone who works with a company.
Okay.
Yeah, that is not large, where you have different sections. A section working on the research, another one working on design, and all. So you just have probably 10. Okay, so as a UX person or as a app developer, how do you leverage on your number to still go through the process, yet not go too deep? Okay. So that's more like the first part. The second one is, are there online sources apart from, let's say, Twitter feeds and all? Online sources apart from tweets.
Okay.
Yeah, where you can easily get research as to user experience. I mean, how people react and respond to solutions and development.
So both questions kind of are tied with terms of response. So the first question is, what do you do when you have a small team and you don't have people dedicated to different things? So there's a concept in research known as guerrilla research. Usually, like to do proper sit down and plan and have one person or two people go and there's a specific time given for research, then you do analysis and feedback. But if you don't have a large team, you can still do research. It's essentially taking time and saying, I'm going to step out of the office and stop random people on the road and ask them questions. So you don't have to spend 5 weeks doing research. You can go to a mall, for example, where there's large human traffic and speak to people like, hi, my name is X, I'm doing Y, can I ask you a couple of questions about Z for a few minutes? Some people say yes, some people say no, and then you can get useful feedback that way. Another way to do it is to call, if you already have like an existing database of users, is to reach out to them and say, if you can't come to our office, we can come to you, or we can call you and have a conversation about what your experience with this is. So you don't always have to have, it's best to always have somebody dedicated to doing one thing, but if you can't afford that, there are ways around it. So you can look into, like I said, guerrilla research. Then for online resources, there are a lot of, to get people, to get feedback. Is it to get feedback?
Not feedback, to have statistics, for example, as to best practices when it comes to UX.
UX best practices.
Yeah, exactly.
So
I use best practices to, kind of explain what I'm trying to say, but that's not really what I'm saying.
So don't quote me, but I'll say there are no UX best practices because your users are different. The users for a specific product are different from users for another product. Even if you're in the same space, like even if you're doing the same thing, your users are different. Even though you might have the same user on, like for example with banks, many people have more than one bank, but you have to always speak to your users. Of course, there are resources that can tell you that 70% of people don't like one thing or 80% of people like one thing, but you always have to. The only best practice, I think, is doing research with your users. Next question.
Yeah, good afternoon. So my question surrounds So I have discovered, or while I work, I discovered that certain things influence our design practices and like de facto standards, like the colors for social media, where to place an element. And that's because old apps or apps in existence, they already use this type of, as in positioning and colors, so that users don't get, they don't get the wrong idea. So every subsequent design follows that type.
Yeah.
But when you want to come up with something new, let's say a flying turtle, like something just out of ordinary, and these guidelines are not there, like these de facto guidelines are not there, and then you go around, and you know the way humans are, they are very, very, very unpredictable. You go to A today, it tells you it wants the button up. You go to B and say, I want it down. And so if you do a sample, especially with a very, very new idea that hasn't maybe hit the market, you will discover that the graph that you plot out of it, it's not going to be really, really defined because everyone is just experiencing a new product or something very, very different from what they're used to. In this case, what do I do as a dev or as a manager or someone who wants to, a UI developer, a UX person? You get me?
Okay, so first, there are things that work the way they work because they are the way they are. So that sounds good. But what that means is that people are accustomed to certain things. So for example, there's a picture that most people have in their head of what a button looks like. So if there's a button on your website that doesn't look like that, people will miss it because they're not familiar with that concept. It's something that is referred to as mental models in psychology. So, sorry, I have to put it in there because I studied psychology. So, yeah, people have mental models and mental maps of what things should look like. So that's why if you change something that 90% of people, 95% of people are familiar with, they will respond almost violently because what's this new thing? And then to answer the second thing, everybody is not going to agree on what something should look like. Like if you do 2 random designs now and show it to everybody in this room, everybody's not going to choose the same thing as the better one. So it's really up to you as I would say probably this is the product manager who would decide that, okay, what is our percentage of, say, acceptance? Where do we say that if X number of people, X percent of people that we show this to accept it, then we'll go with it. Because you can't win everybody. That's just like facts. So another thing is also, how are you asking your questions? What are the methods you are using? Because some methods are more appropriate for some things than others. So for example, if you want to compare to things like, okay, where should the button be placed? Should it be on the left or on the right? You can't really ask people. Because, again, people say they will do A sometimes and then they do B. And it's not because they're lying, it's just because that's what they think they will do. So for a situation like that, if you want to test button placement, for example, A/B testing is the more appropriate thing to do. But if you want to ask people, if you want to find out that why do people even want this button in the first place, the best thing to do will be like speak to them directly and interview them all. And then another thing to be careful about is how you phrase your questions, which can be a whole other talk on its own. So yeah, it's just thinking about when you want to ask people questions, how are you asking them those questions? Okay. So is there any other question? Okay. Do I still have time?
Okay. My question is centered around content management.
Sorry, can you, okay.
My question is centered around content management.
Okay.
Now, would you as a UI or UX developer suggest that content should be personally built or probably picked or outsourced. E.g., what I mean is, let's talk about using photographs.
Pictures.
Pictures, yes.
Yeah.
For backgrounds and all that. Now, would you feel the best practice is to build your own personal concept, or you go and purchase photographs for use for such stuff?
It depends. I mean, like, it depends is a very annoying answer to questions, but a lot of the time, the answer is it depends. Because if you have those things that you need that fits into your brand and the message you are trying to send across, then why not just use them? But if you don't have them and you think it will be easier for you to buy them from somewhere, then buy them. It just depends on what you're trying to achieve and what you have already that you think can help you achieve that. Any more questions? Oh, there's a question.
Hi.
Hello.
My name is Taiwo. My question is a little related to what the other guy asked about changing the culture of experience of users. I've realized in development that it's very
Sorry,
hard.
I can't hear you.
I said I've realized over the years of UI development, Android, that it's really hard to change the culture of how people relate to applications. My question is, what tips can you give to if I'm building an app which is going against the rules of user experience of how apps normally look like? What tips can you give me to make those apps acceptable by the public? Because you're trying to build something really innovative and creative. Like I have an app for storytelling I'm building, and it has some weird animations that people would normally think, what is this? But it's actually very creative. But how do you drive acceptability with that?
Okay. So your question is basically that if you want to create something that is out of the norm, how do you make people accept it? So you can't force people to accept whatever you're creating for them. Also, I think what you're referring to is more like UI components or not necessarily the UX, because the user's experience isn't fixed, I would say. So the UI, so you're saying that if, say for example, everybody is used to square buttons and you want to change your own to circle buttons and nobody's accepting it, right? Yeah, so your experience is kind of tied to the UI. So it just goes back to researching, first of all. Like, okay, why do you want to do this thing? Is it because you feel like it's better for the user, or because the user wants it to be better for them? So, for example, everybody talks about, this is my go-to example, everybody talks about how Nairaland is terribly designed or how Lunaike is terribly designed. But to the people who are using it, it is not terribly designed. The idea that good user experience is the same thing as something that is visually pleasing, I don't know where it came from, but it's wrong, because people have tried to redesign Nairaland especially, but it doesn't quite work, because the basics of, before you even think about visuals and everything, the base of user experience is functionality. Does this thing work the way I think it should work? Does it work the way I expect it to work? Does it meet my needs as a user? Yeah? It's more about, so basically good design is not always visually pleasing, yeah? So it's about, what does the user want? What does the user need? Why can the user get what they want? It's not really about you and what you want. It's about the user. It's always about the user.
But I really think users don't really know what they want until you show them what they want. Say, for example, the the iOS, the level of detail put into the iOS software is very amazing. That is why you would everly pick an iOS or a good Android application. I said the level of detail put into the font style, the colors, the grays, everything put into it is to make the user love application. And it seems like people take functionality over design. I really feel the opposite.
Okay, so what I'm saying is that functionality is part of design. If your product is not functional, then you haven't designed anything that anybody can use. So even, and in as much as you're saying, so from what I'm hearing, you prefer iOS devices, right?
Not exactly, but I just like the details.
Yeah, but then people prefer Android also. So
I'm an Android developer.
So the point is that there is this thing in psychology called the Maslow hierarchy of needs. Yeah, there's a triangle, and at the top of the triangle is like the higher order needs, and at the base of the triangle is the basic needs of hunger, thirst, food, water, etc. And before I start thinking about self-actualization, which is at the top, I have to have my basic needs met. So before I start thinking about is your app fine or whatever, my first question is, does your app do what I need it to do? So if functionality is missing, this is my opinion. People there's different.
I understand. Actually,
views.
personally, I feel you gave an example of Nairaland. I actually feel Nairaland is supposed to be like the Twitter of Nigeria, but it has not because of the UI.
So, but people use it they have lots of users and lots of views.
Since 2004. I said 2 million users since 2004.
But people use it, the people that they like it, and it works for them, and that's it. So another thing, for designers and developers and all of us that create products, we always feel like we know what's best for the users, but people know what they like and what works for them. So it's just about meeting them where their needs are, like meeting those needs that they have. Okay, so if there are no more questions, thank you all for listening.